Hi, everyone. Let's go ahead and do this week's assignment through a video, just because I think it's easier to talk about this, especially when we're dealing with calculations. The first question asked about merit pay and asked you to calculate Elizabeth's salary versus Robert's salary, and then also discuss the different raises that they received over a 5-year period. So Elizabeth and Robert started their job at the same time. Elizabeth ended up starting her salary a little bit higher than Robert. We're going to assume that maybe she had more experience than Robert, or maybe a higher education. And so she started off at 45,000 and Robert started off at 42,000. Now that's not a big difference. It's a $3,000 difference. It doesn't sound like a lot. However, what happens over a time period, especially when you're dealing with merit pay, it can start to add up. So Elizabeth outperformed Robert hands down, and she was able to receive a 4% annual raise every year. I use the same raise every year just to make it a little bit easier on calculations. So she was getting a 4% annual raise, whereas Robert, well, he was only getting a 2% annual raise. Now, keep in mind, this is a merit pay system where not everybody gets the same raise. It's pay for performance. So Elizabeth was outperforming Robert, and so she got a higher percentage rate raise. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like over the course of these 5 years. So again, here's my calculations. You can see they both start off at 45 versus 42, but as the years add up and as that 4% adds up versus that 2%, you can see that in 5 short years, Elizabeth is making 54,000 and change, whereas Robert is only making 46,000 and change. It's really something for you to remember as not only an employer, but an employee, that things add up over time, and fight for every little raise you can. Negotiate every little raise, everything can add up over the course of time. This was just in 5 years. If you think about 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it can really start to add up over that time frame. Whereas then Elizabeth is starting to make a considerable more amount than Robert. I always fight for those little tiny raises, even if it's 1% or 2% or a 0.5%. I promise you, it does add up. Let's go ahead and look at the second question. So I guess what I was looking for in that first question is obviously having those calculations correct, but also talking about what you found interesting about Elizabeth and Robert's pay. Hopefully you found something interesting like I just spoke about. All right, the second question talks about the difference between seniority pay and merit pay. We know that merit pay is pay for performance. Seniority pay is a little bit different. You get paid based on seniority rather than your performance. A good example of this is teachers. So kindergarten through high school, they have seniority pay. Now, seniority pay sounds great in theory, but if you think about it, it doesn't really give any incentive to teachers who are really good at their job. So in North Carolina, if you were to start off, I don't know what the starting salary is for a teacher. I do know it's not enough. My teachers, I've been very fortunate. I've had wonderful teachers for my daughter. I can't talk enough about how great my teachers are for her teachers, I should say. But they're all getting paid the same amount no matter how good they are. So with seniority pay, it could be a little bit unmotivational. A teacher who's really good at their job is going to get the same raise as someone who maybe doesn't care as much or isn't as good. And so seniority pay, basically you start off at the same salary. I think we'll just say $36,000 a year for teachers in North Carolina. And then based on how many years you're teaching, you get raises every year if the state gives a raise. I don't know when the last time they had one. I think sometimes they go through phases where they're getting raises every year, and then they stop getting raises for a bunch of years, and then they pick back up. It really depends on the budget. I don't want to get involved in that conversation, but all I will say is seniority pay can be very frustrating to the employee, especially one who is really good at their job, knowing that they're going to get the same pay on someone else who's been there the same amount of time who maybe isn't as good. The next question, question 3, is calculating piecework. So piecework is done mostly in manufacturing or some sort of factory. Anytime you have standard to create as many things or gadgets or widgets as possible. And so how it typically works is you get paid an hourly wage, and then anything above a set standard, you can get paid additionally for. So in this scenario, we had the hourly wage is minimum 7.25, and then they have the opportunity to earn more based on how many t-shirts or widgets or sneakers or whatever they're making. They go above that standard. So this standard is 10, and the piecework incentive award is 75 cents. Now that 75 cents doesn't sound like a lot, but let me show you what that 75 cents can do over the course of a year. So right here, I have the numbers. We have the different times they went above standard. So you can see the first, almost all of the hours they went above standard except for the third hour. It's, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to keep recording because I'm halfway done and I don't want to re-record because actually finally getting to the point where it was sounding decent. So we'll just continue. I'm sorry about that. But at any rate, we have 7.25. And then in addition to the 7.25 an hour, this talks about the different piecework. So for instance, here we have 10 above standard. And so they receive 75 cents per the 10. So that's $7.50. So for this first hour, they actually made $14.75 an hour and not $7.25. So at the end of the day, if you did this correctly, they would make $70.50 versus the $43.50. Now you can see that 75 cents per piece, it starts to add up. That's an additional $27 a day. Now, $27 a day doesn't sound like a lot, but again, just like in our first example, when you start to add it up over time, it can certainly start to add up. So that 75-cent piecework turns into $135 for the week. I'll take an extra $135. Why not? At the end of the year, if this person continues the piecework on average like they've been doing, they have the opportunity to earn an additional $7,000 just for going above and beyond standard. And so you can see here, it's real incentive for those to make whatever it is that they're making quickly and hopefully with quality work, of course. But you can see here that there is an incentive to be not only have quality work, but also to be efficient and have quick work as well. Right, the last question talks about the projection of many jobs and how they're going to be replaced by automation and robotics in the future. So we've talked about this for years. I remember hearing about this in the 1980s about how computers are going to take over the world and we're not going to have any jobs because at this point there weren't any computers in the workplace. Can you believe going into an office, a corporate office, or even going into a retail store or a restaurant with no computers? Right. And so when computers started to become popular, especially in the 1980s, the desktops became more popular in the offices. Everyone thought that they would not have a job anymore, that the computers would take over their job and they're going to be laid off. Well, here we are all these years later, we still have jobs and we still have computers. If anything, it's created more jobs. And so the fear is that robotics is going to take over automation in factories. And it's a good fear to have. However, when there is robotics involved, there are people who are then have to be responsible for maintaining those robotics, making sure the software works correctly. And so while the robotics might take away some jobs, the fact is that automation might even add some jobs that we weren't thinking about. And so that's kind of where I wanted you to maybe touch that robotics and automation might be the future, but it's not going to hopefully increase the employment because guess what? We need people. We'll always need people. There's that human aspect of it. And we're going to go ahead and need people to work on the different elements of those robotics. All right, hopefully you had the 4 different paragraphs and you touched on what I just spoke about. I know this is a little bit of a longer video, but I hope you enjoyed this week's assignment and have a great week, everyone. Thanks so much.